Hi there, everybody. It's your buddy, your pal, your amigo, your friend, Jeremy Siskind. I'm also the author of Playing Solo Jazz Piano and the author of the Jazz Piano Fundamentals series. Now, I got an email recently from an adult student who's pursuing jazz who said, I don't have a classical background. Can you give me some technical exercises to do to work on technique? And I have to admit, I was a little stumped because for me, as I will explain, technique has so much less to do with what you do, so much as how you do it. I think just about anything can be a technical exercise. In the school of piano playing that I come from, and I've made a couple of videos of Abby Whiteside, believes much more in playing repertoire to learn technique rather than exercise. Now, with that said, what I want to do today is I want to talk about the how. Okay, so how are you going to practice whatever it is you're practicing? And I want to use scales as a first example because I think scales are good, just so useful, not only because you're going to learn technique, but because you're going to learn this important set of notes, which is crucial for understanding theory and improvising. So I'm going to demonstrate some working on scales. And then hopefully we'll have time. We'll look at a little Bach Fugue that I'm working on currently to work on my technique. Now, first of all, a couple of disclaimers. Number one, the best thing you can do is work with a classical piano teacher. YouTube videos ain't going to do it, honestly, if you really want to develop a good technique. Two, this is a huge subject. This is going to be a 10 or 15 minute video. It's not going to cover everything that you could possibly cover in depth. Three, this is less of a disclaimer, but you might be interested in my journey that I had really, I should say that technique was definitely the weak spot of my piano ability until I was about 14. And then I decided I was tired of having terrible technique, and I spent about a summer practicing 3 hours of just technical exercises a day. And I'm still not an incredible technical pianist. I wouldn't make it as a concert pianist, but I've gotten a lot better. And I think some people would consider my technique a strength. So it is something that you can work on, that you can change, but it takes a lot of work. So now, scales. Scales can be practiced a million different ways, right? You could spend your entire life practicing just the major scales in parallel motion, contrary motion, thirds, triplets, dotted rhythms, staccato, legato, piano, forte, and all these things are going to yield good results. Don't ever ask or think, what's the one best way for me? It almost doesn't matter as long as it's a little bit of a challenge for you. What does matter a lot is how you practice those scales. So I have a little list of what you should be looking for, listening for in any exercise where the focus is technique. Okay, so first thing is just listening to yourself, because what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to adjust based on your own listening. This is the kind of thing you can have a teacher point things out, but ultimately you're going to have to be the one to adjust because it's going to happen kind of in real time. And the goal here, you might say, well, listening and technique, those are not that related. But the goal is that you start to understand how different movements of your body are going to create different sounds, so that you can be intentional about the way your body moves in terms of being able to create intentional sound. And so you want to develop a sense of control, the ability to control the sound. So if you're practicing the scale, you're going to be mainly listening for three things. The first one is rhythmic evenness, okay? So are all the notes coming in or is it right? And don't be afraid of practicing slower than you think you need to, because this is actually going to magnify problems, and it's going to give you really good information about problems. Right? So if you're hearing like that, whether it's a separation between the two hands or whether it's... Okay, anything like that, these are going to be issues to think about. Now, the two places where you're most likely to have unevenness are using the fourth finger. Sorry, I don't mean to do a rude gesture. It's the fourth finger. And you guys know that this is connected by tendons to the 3 and 5, so it's generally going to be the finger on which you have the least control. And then the thumb, because the thumb is a different length than the rest of the fingers and requires a slightly different way of being played. So similarly, and probably more importantly, with dynamics, you want every note to sound even. And the thumb is usually the trickiest part here because the thumb usually comes in heavier than the other keys. So if you're hearing... Right. Technically you're playing that scale, but you're not really learning anything about technique because you're not striving for an even sound. So as best as you can, make all of those fingers blend together. Lift-offs are also really important, and this is one area where I see a lot of students struggle, that they will potentially not lift off of a key cleanly. And one nice way to practice this is staccato. And when you're practicing staccato, you want each note to be really exactly the same length, in addition to the same dynamic and rhythmic evenness. So those are some things to really listen for. If you're practicing without listening, what are you going to be doing? You're going to be reinforcing the previous habits that you might have. Okay. Now, if you hear that there's a problem, what are you going to control? What are you going to change? What are you going to adjust? So first of all, the tempo. Practice slower. I have some students who say, I can do it faster, but not slower. You're full of crap. That means that you're not able to listen very well quickly. So there's no excuse for not being able to do everything very, very slow. Real talk, man. Secondly, the amount. What I mean by that is maybe you only play 5 notes of the scale. If you keep messing up the fingering, or if you're really listening for the thumb, maybe you're just going to go... Just really intensely listen and see if that thumb is blending, or just go between these 2 notes, or these 3. And then thirdly, change something about the exercise. So probably the most obvious thing to do here is practice hands separately versus hands together, right? Hands together is going to be a lot more difficult than practicing hands separately. So you can control those things, make them either more difficult, faster tempo, longer scale, more difficult exercise, or easier, depending on what your ear is telling you. Some other examples of a more difficult exercise after hands together would be contrary motion, right? I really messed that up. Right? Or practicing in tense. Or practicing in dotted rhythms is so useful. Practicing in groups of 3, practicing pianissimo. That'll really challenge you to play at a really even dynamic because it's going to make things more obvious. All right, and then the third category is you need to notice how you're feeling. Okay, so the first big thing is tension. Lots of pianists have their shoulders creep up. Lots of pianists hold and grip here. This is all going to affect the sound. It's going to affect your ability and freedom to play. I can't give you, every single possible solution for tension, but you need to know that it's a problem at least at this juncture, and you need to understand how to play without tension. One good way to just establish how your body should feel is to do a glissando. That's essentially how your body should feel as you're playing a scale. Just completely free, sweeping across the keyboard. Secondly, the use of various levers, by which I mean, and I've read about pianistic injuries, and pianists who get injured do the same few motions again and again. Maybe it's from their arm, maybe it's from their fingers, but pianists use their back, they use their legs for support, they move from the shoulder, they move from the elbow, they move from the wrist, they move from the fingers. So playing piano needs to be a full body experience. If you're shutting everything down and playing just from the fingers, you're going to get injured and you're not going to have a variety of sounds. So really thinking about that whole body feeling is going to be really important. One way to practice that is by pretending that you put a little bit of super glue right on your wrist and it's attached to your shoulder. I wouldn't do this for a long time, but this gets your torso, and let's see if you can see me a little bit better. This gets your torso moving to each different part of the piano. It gets your body really involved. So if I'm playing the scale, I have to hunch over all the way this way and support from the torso. That's going to teach you something important about moving your body. And then lastly, I wanted to mention that a big technical problem I see is students playing one note and one chord at a time, one motion for one note. Good pianists group, right? When we're doing this glissando, it's one big grouping. And I'm not playing da, 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 da. Oftentimes the elbow is in charge of grouping. So think about, instead of moving through that phrase with a single elbow motion. Okay? It's a little bit more sophisticated, but it will solve a lot of technical problems, including tension, because if you don't have to force the key down again and again, then you're not going to have so much tension. Okay, so those are some tips for how I would practice a scale. Now, same thing if I'm playing this Bach Fugue. And we love playing fugues because it often forces you to do two things with one hand, right? So if you're a more sophisticated pianist, this is a really important and difficult pianistic concept. But even just playing this theme, I'm listening in all those same ways that I'm listening for in the scale, because I'm also trying to make music. I'm trying to phrase. I'm trying to figure out where I'm aiming for in the phrase. So I practice this fugue not because I'm going to play it in a concert or become a classical pianist. I mean, it's great music. I love the music. But I'm listening in all those same ways. I'm listening for evenness of dynamic, although now I might be making intentional swells. I'm listening for evenness of rhythm. Ba, da, 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 if I'm going... I know there's going to be a problem. And I'm also listening for the intentional kinds of legato, the lift-offs that I'm putting in there. And I'm checking in with my body to make sure that I'm staying loose. I'm phrasing in ways using my elbow that are encouraging groupings. And I'm going to use the same kinds of devices if I feel like I'm not accomplishing what I want. I'm going to simplify. Maybe I'm going to play just the right hand or just the top voice of the fugue. Maybe I'm going to play at a slower tempo. Definitely, I'll play at a slower tempo. Or I might take just a measure at a time and loop it again and again. All right, so those are some small tips about practicing something like scales or something like a Bach piece. And if you're not up to the level of playing a fugue, you could try some inventions or little minuets from Bach. If this is a good level for you, you're probably at a Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 1 level. Things like playing solo piano are going to take a bit more technical acumen. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you watch all the way to the end, why don't you say something about an elbow? Because we talked about elbows and groupings a little bit today. I'll see you later.